What you are about to hear is going to be 75% serious talk. 20% will be two old guys going down a rabbit hole and telling stories about football and rodeo and being at least 5% funny. Please be aware that we may not be grammatically correct or even sound like we know what we are talking about, but we are trying our best to learn and cope with the cards that have been dealt to us. We believe that we can bring hope to those who suffer and help in any way that we can. This is the Head Rush Podcast with Paul Fraze and Corey Berry.
Welcome to the Head Rush Podcast. I'm Paul Fraze, and I played 11 years in the NFL. And our co-host, Corey Berry, rode professional rodeo for 9 years. And at the Head Rush Podcast, we talk about everything related to brain trauma and brain health and wellness. We talk about traumatic brain injury, TBI. We talk about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, traumatic encephalopathy syndrome, and we talk about repeated head impacts. We cover how traumatic brain injuries can and will cause mental health issues such as depression, addiction, lack of executive function, memory loss, even suicide ideology, as well as degenerative neurological issues. These symptoms can be found on the Mayo Clinic and Boston University's websites under symptoms of CTE. Our mantra is how to cope and find hope. And we focus our energy on finding therapies and sharing hope through education and raising awareness.
And today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking to a great doctor. It's Dr. Jim Kelly. Jim Kelly is one of America's top experts on treating concussions, renowned expert in neurology and brain health with extensive experience in traumatic brain injury, concussions, neurorehabilitation. He currently serves as the Chief Medical Officer at Oragenics, where he leads the clinical strategies for the development of innovative neurological treatments, including the ONP-002 is an intranasal drug designed to treat concussions, and he'll talk more about that. Dr. Kelly served as the director of the National Intrepid Center of Excellence at Walter Reed National Military Center. Notably, Dr. Kelly has deep ties to the sports world through his work with the NFL. And additionally, he also co-authored the American Academy of Neurology Concussion Guidelines, widely regarded as the gold star standard for concussion management. He bridges clinical practice, research, sports medicine with a focus on brain injury mechanisms, recovery strategy, and innovative drug delivery systems like intranasal therapy. Dr. Jim Kelly, welcome to the Head Rush Podcast.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Kelly, you did mention you've met the Jim Kelly that used to be in Buffalo for years and years. I think he's back with a team in some capacity, right? Possibly.
Oh,
but
yeah, I don't know. I think that would be a great thing if he is.
Yeah.
What a great guy.
I actually got to play against him 16 times. I played for the Jets for 7 years, and we only beat them one time. So that was during their 4 Super Bowl runs, and they had pretty incredible teams those years. So we are excited to have you. We've heard about the intranasal protocol that you have been working on, and I do the movie.
Concussed the American Dream featuring Brett Favre that's out. You can see it on Prime Video. And I just watched it again for like the 4th time yesterday because I wanted to get to know you a little bit better and get to introduce all this. And because this is innovative stuff, so a lot of people don't hear about it, and I'm included on it. And I know this all started with Dr. Van Landingham and I saw him talking about it, and you'll get into it more, but this is for immediately after concussions. It's got, tell us more about it.
Sure. Well, as you both know, we don't have any medications that I, as a neurologist and other physicians, can offer for any stage of traumatic brain injury that treat the underlying cause. There are lots of medications we use, but they're actually for the symptoms, not the underlying neurological problem. This is an approach that would then be much more targeting the underlying cause. So the inflammatory changes, and I've heard in your podcast, and I've seen some of these things, you know how this works, you know the terminology. The inflammatory piece of what happens to brain tissue is actually addressed by this particular medication approach. And it actually also influences internal cellular changes that are what we call oxidative distress or stress of the inside functioning of neurons. And it actually can interrupt that process as well, and we think lead to preserved neurological function in an acute concussion setting. It has a variety of other little things that it does as well, this one particular medication. But the idea is to get it into somebody in a dose that's useful quickly in the brain, not throughout the body. And we do that by a nasal preparation that gets it up through the shared blood supply of the nasal passages that go right up into the head. And so the circulation of the blood within the head gets this medication much more quickly without it going through, your gut if you swallowed it, or even the veins and arteries if it was intravenous, let's say. The liver is much less involved because it doesn't circulate throughout the whole body before it gets into the head. So the idea is to get something in a very small dose right into the problem area, the organ itself that's injured, which is the brain, not throughout the entire body. And that's the bottom line of what this is about, in order to best approach the brain injury itself quickly.
So in a very juvenile way, I'm remembering having a stuffed nose as a kid and taking Afrin, and all of a sudden I could breathe. But,
Yep.
but I don't know if there's a steroid in Afrin or not. But the ingestion, the intranasal ingestion, so it crosses the blood-brain barrier, or where does it take effect in, for the concussive, for the cytokines, for the microglia, all that fun stuff?
You get it. So here, let me start with the real simple basics of how it gets there. This is actually the device, one of the devices that we're using in order to get this up into the nasal passages. The medication is loaded in a chamber, and you actually puff it up then into the nose yourself. And so this breath-propelled approach makes that shoot up through the nostril up into the deeper areas of the nose, right below the sinuses, actually. So it's right in the concha area, where the blood supply actually then takes it from the nasal mucosa, the wet tissues there, right up into the head through ports that are already there, where the nasal passages and where the olfactory nerve comes down through the skull. And so it goes right up into the intracranial compartment, circulates through the blood supply and probably the spinal fluid to some extent, at least we see it there. But then it can circulate around the brain, and because it is a nanoparticle preparation, it actually is able to pass the blood-brain barrier compared to bigger molecules that are blocked. So for all those reasons, this has been created by Dr. Van Landingham in a way that I think is actually much more advanced and much more likely to be working. Now our job is to show in clinical trials that what we've already done in terms of safety and the animal studies and all that show that this should work, we want to make sure it actually can be shown to work in the human population in acute concussion.
So where are you at in this process right now? if I'm looking right, have you guys done the preclinical phase 1?
Oh, yeah, that's all done. And the safety, the preclinical part is actually largely chemistry lab and animal science. Then you go to phase 1, which is human safety testing. And that's all been done. And the FDA has known about this information and given its blessing for moving on to the phase 2, which now is a feasibility study. And that's what we're already engaging in Australia and New Zealand, to use their setups that they're already built for in the big hospital systems there, to be able to track the outcomes of individuals who come through their emergency departments with concussion. So it's an opportunity that we don't have very well built here in the United States. It's something that they're very good at, and we're going to take advantage of that. And some of the drug companies that you've heard of over the years have been doing this for a long time in those two settings. And so our relatively small and relatively new pharmaceutical company is actually doing that as well in those locations.
Well, that's very interesting to me because, yes, phase 1, and I was involved with an orphan disease, and we were involved with clinical trials and preclinical trials, and I'm kind of, it was the safety more so than the efficacy. I didn't know that, but when we got into it, I understood that phase 1 is safety. But that's interesting. I've lost my sense of smell over the years.
Me too.
You too. And I had 2 strokes in 7 days about 7 years ago, and I was with the Mayo doctor, the head of neurology, Kevin Barrett. Do you know?
Sure.
Okay.
Not personally, but I know who that is.
Well,
sure.
he first of all, he do you know what he did in college? He played offensive lineman at Brown. And I'm after my second stroke, I couldn't, I lost my speech. It was an ischemic stroke. And I was like, you used your brain, you stopped playing football and used your brain, for really, really good things. But he told me, we get motorcycle accident victims that lose their sense of smell like that. And because they smashed their head on the ground. And I didn't realize the olfactory or is that how do you say that?
The olfactory nerve, yeah.
There's there's a plate with little tiny holes, and there's strands nerves that go down through, and that's your sense of smell. And they get sheared in that accident. They get sheared when you're jerking your head back and forth on a bucking bronc, right?
Right.
They get sheared when I'm slamming my head into a 300-pound man. But that made so much sense, what you just said, how it gets from that intranasal application, how the drug gets to the brain pretty darn quickly. And that, am I thinking on straight along those lines, or
you're way more sophisticated than the average bear around this kind of stuff, I'll tell you. So yes, absolutely. And by the way, the severe sudden loss of smell is most common when somebody falls and lands on the backs of their heads. And at first you think, well, what's that about? It's counterintuitive. But what happens when the head suddenly stops on infinite mass, like a concrete floor?
Like a 1,200-pound horse, his butt.
Well, that could be part of it too. But the idea here is sudden stopping of the head, but the brain keeps moving.
Right.
So the intracranial change, the pressure changes and the movement actually distorts and to some extent can actually literally shear those vertically positioned olfactory nerves at the front of the base of the brain. And so they're dragged back and they swell and they disintegrate. And it takes time for all that to happen, but it can be very, very quick with one big blow. And it can happen with smaller blows over a long span of time.
We want to thank our sponsor for this episode, CG Capital. Looking to elevate your company's visibility and attract the right investors? At CG Capital, we specialize in strategic investor relations that cut through the noise. Whether you're pre-IPO or publicly traded, our team helps shape your story, connect with the key stakeholders, and drive long-term shareholder value. Thank you very much again to CG Capital for this episode.
And thank you to James Kelly for this episode. Dr. James Kelly.
Dr. James.
We've kind of looked at it. I've got roughly 10,000 repeated hits, several concussions in my lifetime, 5 concussions after my pro rodeo career. And doctors kind of say once you have one concussion, it's easier to get another and easier to get another. And you've had numerous repeated hits. It looks, and I'm looking at phase 2 study design and objectives right now, randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial to evaluate safety, tolerability, and feasibility in a TBI, will assess cognitive function, visual motor performance, and blood biomarkers over 5-day dosing period, first dose within 12 hours of the incident. What are and Paul's great at this stuff because of his foundation, the Joshua Fraze Foundation. He's good at all this. What are the blood biomarkers you're looking for?
Well, the one that we're using as an entrance criteria as part of the reason to kind of think that somebody's had a concussion is an elevation in GFAP, glial fibrillary acidic protein. And that's the one that I think has best shown in other studies, not just with, we're using it. It's not that we've actually created the biomarker itself, but the biomarker testing is actually a commercial product now that you can buy, and within minutes, right there with fresh blood, you can see whether that GFAP is elevated in that individual who's just had a concussion. So we're using that one in particular and a panel thereafter to track over the hours and days beyond to learn better, besides that biomarker, what others, UCLH1, a variety of others that could be useful, NFL, neurofilament light. So we're looking at a variety of other biomarkers in blood that then can inform us about changes that occur over time with or without the application of a medical intervention like this. We want to be able to see what happens anyway, and then also, does it change those, and does it change clinical outcome from the other tests that we do and perform with these individuals who volunteer to be subjects for us.
Do you have a baseline of the what was the glio?
GFAP, and no, but we know what the range is.
You know what the range is, and so after an acute situation, you can measure it, and then 5 days later you can see if it's diminished from the application. How did the preclinical on the animals, the preclinical trials go? Did you see that same? First of all, is it the same biomarker in rats or mice or?
Well, depends on the animal as to what it is you do, but the preclinical piece did not have to do with biomarkers.
Okay.
In this case, it had to do with where does this medication go? How much is in tissue, how much is in spinal fluid, how quick does it get there, all those sorts of things, so that you then have some sense of it's getting where we're targeting, and it's also timed as to when it's getting there in certain phases of time after the applied injury.
Did you have any issues with toxicity for larger dosages?
So all those have been worked out, and it's shown in the doses that we think are therapeutic not to have a toxic effect.
Oh, wow.
It's one of those that we're very, very pleased with in that regard. There's, some people had a little bit of a nasal irritation with the nasal application in the early safety trials, but that's it. There is not a toxicity of any worrisome nature. And it's partly because, Paul, when you do this approach, you use a minuscule dose compared to what's necessary if you orally ingest a medication or even intravenously administer it, because it's got to go everywhere in the body, be digested, go through the liver and all that. And you need huge amounts of it compared to what we're applying that then is dragged right directly into the brain.
So this drug, and if I'm understanding it right, this isn't going to be something where you go under the blue tent, you get sprayed, and you can go back to playing football.
I don't think we're going to get to that in the near future. I mean, who knows what down the road might come from this, but I don't think that's likely. I think what's going to happen is individuals who've had a clear-cut concussion and are not going back under any circumstances anyway will end up getting this in a locker room setting or thereafter in some medical setting, and it will reverse, or not necessarily reverse, but actually reduce the amount of inflammatory and kind of residual effects that are happening acutely, thus not creating the chronic problem that we're already worried about.
And speaking of the chronic problem, I know that when they did my MRI on my neck and brain, I think it's called mastoids, that they found in the lower part of my neck, which is brain inflammation up in there. And so they're trying to reduce the brain inflammation that's been caused over all the years.
Did you mention something about they and I've never heard this before, the spinal fluid was, you had too much or it was collecting in the wrong places? Was that they're
thinking right now that I may have too much spinal fluid up in my brain and they need to reduce it. I am diagnosed TES, probable CTE, and my understanding is that there's 4 stages of TES. There's suspected CTE, possible CTE, probable CTE, and then there's CTE, but that's only at post-mortem when Ann McKee holds my brain in her hands. And she's going to be on next month to get more in depth, and Mike Alasko is also going to be on next month. And so with this nasal spray, it's to immediately get up into the brain capsule or the skull or whatever you want to call it, not being scientific myself. It's to hit that brain inflammation immediately to where maybe them tau proteins don't go to the lesions that were caused due to the concussion.
So the tau protein and its changes that are chronic and so forth may or may not have anything to do with what's happening acutely in a concussion per se. So we don't want to kind of conflate those as somehow this is going to, change the way tau is handling this. We do know that tau, as a protein element inside nerve cells, actually leaks out and is found in spinal fluid in individuals who have spinal taps and are studied that way thereafter. That's when the Swedes did that beautiful work years ago on amateur boxers even, and we're seeing tau protein in spinal fluid. Right. But even more impressively was neurofilament light, which is also an intracellular, intraneuronal protein. More of that is actually in the axon, the long, slender thread that connects the nerve cells. And that's where the injury actually registers. And neurofilament light was even more likely to be elevated in spinal fluid shortly after boxing matches in those studies, more so even than tau. So what we're really trying to do is get to cellular changes in general with oxidative stress and the kinds of energetic problems that occur acutely in concussion, and reduce the amount of inflammation in tissue and the nerves themselves.
When you say reducing the inflammation, that makes me think of steroids or like prednisolone or something like that. Is that the mechanism in this product?
It's similar. This is actually which is a version, if you will, similar to progesterone, just to name something that's out there that people know about, that actually is a chemically formulated, not naturally occurring anti-inflammatory neurosteroid. So it's in that category of a neurosteroid, that this is not something, this particular chemical that ONP002 is not something the body makes. This is something that we now know helps reduce the amount of inflammatory changes and intracellular problems like oxidative stress that are occurring. But it doesn't have, as best we could tell, the kind of hormonal changes associated with that might be adverse in a male population, let's say.
Like the testosterone and all of that. Like my testosterone really plummeted, and I'm on pregnenolone now. But oxidative stress, it's funny you keep mentioning that. My wife bought me this little thing, and it's a urine stick, and I urinate on it, and has all these different types of tests that it does. And my oxidative stress is low or high or low. It's not
Probably
good.
high.
It's not good at all. And so all this stuff comes is, so phase 2, you got 40 patients enrolled right now and a meaningful date, correct?
So that's what we're now starting.
Oh, you're
and
starting.
that is the feasibility study that you're mentioning. Yeah.
Okay, and that's to generate proof and concept and evidence. And then after that, where do you go from there? I mean, what are the steps to get to where it's going to be open to the market?
Great question. So then the next thing is it comes back to the United States, where a much bigger trial at a variety of centers around the country, 30, maybe more, will be applying this same approach with the same clinical measures about cognitive function and eye movements and balance, let's say, or whatever, that we can all agree will be part of that same protocol. And so that's what the FDA requires, is if you're going to move through the process that the FDA then ultimately approves, you can start it in other countries in a smaller way. But you have to bring it back to the United States and go to centers that they are watching, if you will, because you've announced them, who they are, what you're doing with them. The protocol is approved ahead of time, and it's a much bigger study. That will be happening once this earlier study that you just mentioned is finished. Then we bring it back here.
How long is that study going to be at phase 2?
The phase 2 one that we're now kicking off is actually going to finish this year. So
and
we'll have
you're
that
open to bring it to the U.S. next year?
Maybe even late this year, but yeah, certainly next year.
So you have no lack of patients, that's for sure, and that's T ends in a TS, not a CE, right?
Well, I'm reading your paperwork right here. Where does it say 2.8 billion?
Million. Yeah. See, the 3.8 concussions or TBIs, or I don't know if it was a.
I think that one was in the sports community in one study. The one that I'm familiar with is 4.8 million people are evaluated in U.S. emergency departments each year for TBI.
Really?
And we know that's an underestimate because we don't have a true registry.
And
it's not going to pick up everybody.
There's a lot of bumps on the head that never get taken to the hospital. That's for sure.
I know. I've been concussed, and we were driving to a rodeo in California, and I woke up and thought I was in Texas. I was about ready to throw down on the people in the car because it's like, hey, we're supposed to be in California. What the hell are we doing in Texas? That never got noticed. As a matter of fact, I got to the rodeo and got on my bareback horse. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot that doesn't even get noticed. And so, I mean, how does all this get funded? How does it, and I'm new to all of this, so you're big into it through the Joshua Fraze Foundation. But how does all this get funded? I mean, it's got to be tremendous. I know that CG Capital is a big funder, correct?
Well, they're helping us with the funding mechanism and finding those investors necessary in order to keep this thing going in a bigger way. But this is a private, entity. The company Oragenics is actually traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and so it's something that people can invest in. And just imagine how many people are waiting for the opportunity to have something available when a concussion occurs, because we have nothing. Wouldn't it be great if we could provide this kind of opportunity for individuals across the country and beyond this country? So it's the mechanism is actually a privately funded mechanism.
And on the stock exchange, it's just OGEN, right?
Yep, OGEN, exactly.
Back to the oxidative stress. I was listening to a podcast for Dr. Maroon. You obviously,
Maroon.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you're in the NFL, you guys know each other or know of each other.
We do.
Ain't that the one that Bruce made fun of?
Well, hang on. It was, he was mentioning he's excited about, there's a lack of glutamine, I guess, in the oxidative stress. The oxidative stress is worse in an environment low in glutamine. Glutamine.
Well, I think it may be glutamate that you're talking about,
okay.
Glutamic acid. And what happens in acute concussion is that particular, what we consider a neurotransmitter, might not be, it's a putative neurotransmitter, glutamate, is actually dumped out in excess at the time of the injury. It actually is bathing neurons in an excitatory neurotransmitter circumstance that is not natural. And in fact, that particular problem can lead to further neurodegeneration by itself. Too much glutamate.
Too much. Okay.
So it's a whole cascade, Paul, of things that happen at various times, and that's just part of it. There's the excitatory neurotransmitter effect that's excitotoxic.
Right,
is the term used. Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. I played 11 years in the NFL. I went through that. I didn't join the concussion settlement lawsuit. Obviously, when it was awarded to the players, I obviously got a baseline, and I'm in the protocol, I suppose. I haven't followed up. Actually, I'm going to follow up with Cleveland Clinic. The NFL has actually taken measures to give players the opportunity, if we seek them out, they give us the opportunity to get tested, to get the baselines, to get neurological help if needed, or, doctors and so on and so forth. What have you seen? Obviously, your one, the one paragraph talks about, your involvement with the NFL teams, and you're a consultant. You worked with as the neurologist for the Bears for years. What have you seen that has advanced players' protection or health through I'm sure some of your influence too?
Well, from the very beginning, what I've seen, and I'm very happy to see happen over the decades, is taking this very issue seriously, as you are now and speaking to. Back when this was all started, the athletes themselves, and certainly a lot of the people around the NFL level of team structure, did not take concussion seriously, even trivialized it and joked about it. And that's not happening anymore. I'm very happy to see that. And so even the whole thing, Corey, you were talking about blue tent. There was no blue tent when I was doing this stuff
No,
at the Bears
right.
Soldier Field.
Well, and I got to say, the NFL has a little bit more work to do. Last year, didn't they have a player that was arguably dizzy and done, and he went back on the field?
Tua, the Miami Dolphin quarterback. But anyway,
Go on.
There certainly are individual cases that could be argued that might have been handled differently. Yeah, and I'm not going to get into that. But the idea, if you were looking at the overall trajectory of what has improved, it is taking this problem seriously. It is implementing the protocols that you well know that include even something that I co-authored with two brilliant neuropsychologists. That is the mental status test as a component of the NFL protocol for what's happening in that blue tent and what's happening in the locker rooms and so forth, along with balance testing and eye movement changes and symptom reviews and so forth. It's much more sophisticated than it had been years ago. And that's partly because a group of us were involved back in the 90s creating the menu of what ought to be on those tests and starting it out in Joe Maroon's Pittsburgh Steelers group and Chicago and Miami. And so little by little that influenced others. And I think the entire organization is actually has upped its game in that regard and gotten much more sophisticated about this problem.
I think they got, and I'm a skeptic. I don't think that the helmet covers are going to help. It doesn't, it's kind of like when I got to where I was able to get back on my horse and they said, you ought to wear a helmet. And I'm like, why? And they said, the only thing it's going to do is stop me from breaking my head open. It doesn't stop my brain from hitting the skull. If I run into Paul's chest with a helmet, it's not going to stop my brain from smacking the skull. It just pads it a little bit.
It's a whole different conversation if you want to have that we can have.
Right. No, I don't want to have that. That's not what this is about. I just, and I remember after I retired from rodeo, they came out with a computer system to where you go on and you do a computer test to see if you're concussion or not. And nowadays I look at that and say, well, computers, you can always have someone else do it for you and then you go back and play. The standing, the walking, the eye movements, the physical executive functions, all of that, I think, is where it needs to go more and more, like you say. So after you finish phase 2, you go to phase 3, you're in America. You do the 30 or 40 or however many hospitals or doctor's offices or NFL teams or whatever. What happens from there? How does this become to where it's noticed?
Then it goes back up into the FDA for final approval. And that then is nearing the final stages of when it can be commercially made available with their imprimatur. Go ahead and use it for this purpose. And then it'll have very specific uses, what they call indications. And in this case, what we're aiming for is that acute concussion category. People in emergency departments, in locker rooms or wherever this is actually being evaluated. Even in an ambulance. I mean, all kinds of things are administered in an ambulance now, including some nasally. So imagine we can get to that stage where then the FDA approves the use under those circumstances. That's where we're going.
Right on. And I think that would be amazing if you can get to that inflammation quickly. Mm-hmm. I think it's still going to take time to get back on the field or on a horse or recover. You still got to go through. I know my last concussion was, my second to last concussion was November 15th of 2022 when I smacked the tree at 65.
Right.
And for 3 months, I couldn't have a light on. I couldn't have a TV on. I had to wear earmuffs. When I went to the doctor, we had to have blackout shades for my glasses. I wore ice caps. I mean, I was miserable for 3 months to where maybe if this nasal spray becomes available, I'm only in that state for a week or a month.
That's what we're hoping. That's what we want to be able to show.
And I think that, but again, when I get a major concussion because of all of my prior stuff, and we talked about it, this nasal spray wouldn't be good to help someone that's been suffering as long as me and Paul, correct?
Well, there may be another medication that actually can be applied through the nasal administration and formulation, because there are lots of them out there that might be useful for other neurological diseases, but then brought through this same nasal blood supply to the brain approach that just need to be tried.
Do you have the patent on the actual application? Or
Yeah, so this device is patented, and then there's actually one that's automated, if you will. It's triggered in
Right.
case the breath-propelled,
Right.
use is not, functional, and so that's being patented as well for this purpose. Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
So how long do you think the total trial and everything will take to get to public? I mean, what are you guys looking at? 5 years?
Yeah, we're hoping for this to wrap up in 2 years, and then you go through the final FDA kind of scrutiny.
And well, you got Robert Kennedy. That's a plus. So you're hoping that this stuff comes to market 2028?
That would be right.
That would be outstanding if we could get there.
What do you, so as a neurologist, that's what you are, a doctor.
Yes.
You're a neurologist. What do you think? And I've been kind of, a conversation I had with Chris Nowinski about 8 years ago. It went like this. I said, I chose to play this game. I knew that ramming my head against a 300-pound guy over and over and over and over again is not probably the best thing for my brain. But he said, well, Paul, think about the 7-year-olds that are strapping on the helmet. What do you, and Chris is to the point where, and I'm getting there, if not already there, flag football is not a bad option until 14 years old. And I know the NFL is starting to promote flag football as well. As a neurologist, I mean, I have nominal education of myelin sheath and development of the prefrontal cortex and then the myelin around the axons and so on and so forth. And that development,
Adolescence.
it goes through adolescence, and the prefrontal cortex is the last to develop, and can take years. I actually told my daughter when she was 14 years old, I said, honey, boys and girls' brains, our brains don't really mature until for girls 24, and for boys 29, 30 years old. She's driving back from her freshman year of school. She's driving back, and she says, Dad, you remember you used to tell me that? She said, it is so true.
What is your thought on, as a neurologist and with this nasal spray, on adolescent football or hockey or anything like that? Are you with Concussion Legacy Foundation to where maybe we ought to go to flag football till 14?
Well, I'm not with them in any official way, but I certainly agree with that approach. I think that anything we can do to reduce the load of those early injuries would be absolutely the right way to go. And I think, Corey, you and I will have a different discussion later about the usefulness of helmets, because they actually do reduce the amount of impact into the brain, depending on the helmet, of course, and how it is that it's applied. But in any case, all of that matters. All of that matters. And so anything we can do, just like you've heard of some high schools and colleges, reducing the amount of actual pads on collisions that are happening in practices.
Not here in Texas, boy. Let me tell you, here in Texas at 5 years old, that hit him. Football's old in here in Texas.
Any influence you can have Yeah.
But we'll try, and it's like a rodeo. And I told Paul, I says, I started riding at a young age, and sheep, and then calves, then steers, then bulls, then horses. And you look at the years that I spent doing it, from my first steer at 8 years old, and I retired at 29, and I know people rodeoed into their 30s. It's just I broke my neck and went to UCSF and found cognitive nerve damage and was pretty much told, are you top 15 in the world? No. Are you going to the regional final? No. Then you need to retire because this could have lasting impacts. Well, I did retire and still ended up having lasting impacts. So I believe with the myelin sheath is what it's called.
Myelin, yeah.
The myelin sheath doesn't,
Myelination.
and that's the protective sheath, if I'm correct, that covers the brain, the frontal lobe.
It's a part of the white matter. I
Right.
believe,
The myelin is a wrapping around the axon. It's a microscopic element.
Mm-hmm.
And there are literally billions of those nerve cells with myelin sheaths like that.
Right.
But that doesn't finish getting developed until what, 14, 15?
Later. The frontal part of the human brain develops last in terms of the anatomy. And as Paul was indicating, it takes longer for boys and young men than it does for girls and young women.
Welcome to the Head Rush Podcast, brought to you by the Patrick Risha CTE Awareness Foundation. Karen Siegel, thank you so much. Paul?
So go to stopcte.org, learn about their foundation, and they are sponsoring us for the next year. We are thrilled to have them team up with them and bring awareness to this disease.
So please go to their Facebook page, go to their website, check them out. Karen is very, very, very willing to work with you. Contact her, and if you do know her, thank her for us, or just go on their Facebook page and say thank you for sponsoring the Head Rush Podcast.
I want you to talk about Oragenics again briefly, and give us kind of the the highlights, the lowlights, what you guys have been going through. What are you feeling? Are you feeling really confident going into this phase 2?
I'm delighted with the way this is working out and the seriousness of this. The board of the company, which we just met with this week, the sophistication of the individuals from a scientific as well as business perspective that this small expert group has actually assembled. I'm very excited about the prospects for this. And every time that I've looked at over the years now, this has been going on for some time in terms of the development of this particular chemical compound. When I talk to people who know the science better than I do, they're saying, holy smokes, doesn't that make sense? Isn't this the thing we should be doing? And so now our excitement is around the idea of getting this done in the field with this particular scientific approach of clinical outcomes and taking it then to the next bigger stage.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I really am. And I'm glad we had this episode because I learned a lot about the brain, even though mine is shrunken and damaged and dinged and dumped. I don't know why you're laughing. You're the same.
Well, yeah, I probably am to a point.
And I'm excited, and this was good. And, we first heard about this on Concussed, the American Dream feature, and Brett Favre. And it's got to be amazing just to have your name next to Brett Favre. I mean, you have Paul. He was at the Super Bowl with him, so.
I was with the team 1 year, and I came in the day after the final cut. I was traded from the Jaguars, and Brett, the first thing I see of Brett Favre, he's got a box of his books, and he's handing one out to and he handed one to me, and I didn't know Brett, and here, and I read that book, and that was a pretty eye-opening book, to me, I never gotten involved with the painkillers or anything like that. I really didn't like anything, but I tell you what, Toradol really, you got a bulging disc in your L5S1, Toradol takes the pain right away, and you can
Actually works, doesn't it?
you can actually play 20 plays backing up one of the most storied, Reggie White defensive lineman in the world, and but the next when it wore off 18 hours later, I couldn't walk.
Mine's totally fused.
Oh really? I had to.
L4, 5, and S1 is totally fused on mine.
Oh no! You're going to say something about tough cowboys and wuss football players, right? So,
well, ask a doctor. How many cowboys whine about turf toe and take a month off?
That's not right. Well,
I'm not getting involved in this discussion.
Well, we talked a little bit before.
What is turf toe? You're with the NFL. What?
He's a neurologist. That's as far away from the brain.
With the NFL. What is turf toe? Everybody wants to know, what is turf toe?
It actually is a real thing. It's a painful injury, mainly of the big toe. It's the most vulnerable, that actually is injured because, well, we call it turf toe because it actually happens more commonly in AstroTurf, or that's a brand, if you will, of artificial turf, than it does on actual natural grass. Now, all humans have some vulnerability to this kind of thing, but that particular sport with that particular change in the field surface actually then led to that term, which is an injury to the toe in that kind of forward jamming, if you will, of the toe.
And it really hurts too.
Oh yeah.
My wife broke her pinky toe.
Yeah.
Banging it into the refrigerator or stove or something years ago.
Yeah.
And it didn't stop her from doing anything. She just said ouch a lot, but she still did it.
Okay. All right. We love to end with a word of hope. Tell us how you're feeling about the future of brain inflammation, and give us something to share with our audience.
I'm very pleased with that particular approach that you have on your podcast, and that's part of your mission, as I see as well, and I think it's terrific. Imagine if, in fact, we had a medication, and this would be one, but we could do others as well, that are useful in this fashion to be applied without needles, without it being huge doses, acutely under the circumstances, to settle down brain inflammation. Right now, we're talking about concussion. How about more severe brain injury? How about stroke? A whole variety of things might be useful in terms of treatments of this particular pharmaceutical approach. And so we're just at the early stages of something that could be a real game changer, a huge advance for humankind. And I know that sounds kind of, out there and a bit much, but I think I'm excited about that. And I find it very hopeful. So thanks for asking for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for coming on, Jim. It is a pleasure to speak with you, and we'll have to have you on again. So to be part of Oragenics, they can go on the New York Stock Exchange and buy shares into it. Is that the only way, or how else can people find out about Oragenics other than Oragenics.com? What else is available?
That actually is the best approach. And then you mentioned CG Capital, so that those individuals interested in that kind of engagement from a business standpoint would be routed to them, to CG Capital. So, yeah, all of that is available through that website approach.
Okay. And I appreciate it. And thank you again for coming on. My word of hope for this trip, or this episode, not this trip.
It is a trip.
It is a trip. I mean, learning this stuff is getting crazy, meeting with these doctors.
You're getting smarter, aren't you? I know I am.
Dumber. Too much information feeding into this little bitty pea brain.
Oh.
My word of hope is no matter where we're going at this in the Head Rush podcast, like I said on a video, is I'm truly amazed at the people that we have come into contact. Our fans, the people that like us on Facebook and Instagram and go to our website, and the amount, I mean, we've had
Close to 17,000.
17,000 views, but we've had Kevin Stevens. We've had other doctors. We've had, I mean, we got Ann McKee and Michael Osco coming on. We got Dr. James Kelly talking about the future.
Right.
That, I mean,
Hopeful.
and it's very hopeful. Yeah. And think about, and I don't know if it will help the end all of me or you, but hopefully this nasal spray can go up to where I can take it and can help lower the brain inflammation in my brain later after a concussion. And I'm hoping maybe it comes to that point, because it's like me and you talked right now. If Ann McKee or someone like Dr. Jim Kelly that is doing all these trials and research and everything to find a cure, if Dr. James Kelly comes up and said, hey, this nasal spray is available, but you got to meet this criteria. I'm at TES probable CTE, where you're beginning the whole phase again. I'm going to get there before you, and James Kelly's going to call me up and say, hey, you're TES probable. We need to test you.
I hear what you're saying. I would hope the Oragenics, that product is more of the less of the tau protein, keeping the phosphorylated tau at bay, whatever. In that case, I'm at the end of the line because I have no diagnosis. But hopefully the Oragenics, I could, everybody. It sounds like it's a very widely, if it's the efficacy is proven, and the safety is proven, it sounds like there's a lot of people that are going to benefit from it.
Millions a year could be helped under the circumstances. Paul, you're right.
Oh yeah, just think about it. Every car accident,
right.
Every kid falling off a bicycle, every lunatic football player that wants to go bang their head with another 300-pound man, a dummy cowboy that wants to bang his head off horns or back of a horse, or barrel racer, all the way down to 3-year-old Jimmy learning, or 2-year-old Jimmy learning to walk and tripped its head off a table. I mean, the advantages of this would be tremendous if they could lower that brain inflammation so quick that maybe it doesn't hurt the chemicals in the membranes inside the brain that can be lasting. Because I read somewhere, what was it, that a single blow to the head, a major concussion, can have symptoms up to 17 years?
Well, and you might be able to verify this. I understand that inflammatory cytokines can be detected up to 17 years after your last subconcussive hit. Is that kinda?
That's fairly new information. It's probably the case. What we do know is that not just concussion, but multiple concussions and more severe brain injury creates a chronic inflammatory process.
Right. It's just a cycle. It's a cascading effect.
Exactly. And so imagine this same medication could be useful under those circumstances chronically.
Oh,
for people.
Yeah.
I mean, that would help MS, that would help Parkinson's, that would help out all the brain damage eventually, if it ever got to that point, because all of that is fed off of inflammation.
Well, we'll
cross that bridge when it comes to it. That's a long
Let's
way
get
away.
through phase 2.
Let's get through phase 2.
Successfully
get through phase 2. And they're in Sweden right now?
Sorry, say again?
You're in Sweden right now?
No, I'm not in Sweden right now. I'm actually in Florida for meetings, but Yeah, the trials will be in Australia and New Zealand.
Australia and New Zealand.
Australia and New Zealand. And so hopefully this stuff comes back to America, get it back to the Gulf of America, and let's get this thing approved and going. And if you're interested in joining the Oragenics team, if anybody out there wants to get involved, go to OGN on the New York Stock Exchange. Go to oragenics.com. If you're big money and you're invested, go to CG Capital. And if you donate enough money, people, I'm sure James Kelly will buy you a dinner.
Well,
I think I'm going to sign off.
To SEC, we're getting into SEC things right now, so we have no investment advice, but you got to check this technology out. That's for sure.
That's what I'm saying. So, thank you so
Very good.
much. And
Godspeed.
Godspeed.
Thank you both. Very nice.
Appreciate it. We'll
Appreciate
see you.
Okay,
see you soon.
bye.
That was yet again another great episode. We learned about a new technology that is very hopeful.
Can help millions.
Yeah. I thought, from watching, a movie, called Quiet Explosions, they talked about 2 million TBIs a year. Now the new research shows almost 4 million head traumas or visits to an emergency room or in a hospital for a head trauma per year. And this has the potential of causing anti-inflammatory process in the brain, in the body. So that's pretty exciting.
Oh, I think it's very exciting. And I just want to close out by saying, please go to our channel, our YouTube channel. We're on Apple, we're on Google, we're on Odyssey. You go to whatever platform you want, but please go to our Facebook channels, our Instagrams, our website, headrushpodcast.com.
Like, share, subscribe, whatever you do.
Whatever you do.
Get the word out.
Get the word out. Share. Let's just get the word out about the Head Rush podcast. As you can see, we got great people coming on, talking about innovation, talking about past, talking about current. I think we're really giving a lot of hope and awareness. And thank you all for staying tuned to the Head Rush podcast.
Thank you. And stay alert.
Stay alive.
Thank you.
This podcast is for general information only and does not constitute the practice of medicine. The use of this information and the materials linked to this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard and delay in obtaining medical advice from any medical condition they have, and they should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.